Just because something is processed does not make it bad.
Okay, so everyone's heard it here first that they need to stop panicking if they read the word processed.
Plant-based meats are a category of foods that have been in the boxing ring by the global food industry. The meat industry is a $1.3 trillion industry globally.
Usually when people switch to plant-based foods, they're coming to it for a reason. And more often than not, it is an ethical reason.
What do they do when they try and decipher whether a food is good or bad?
First of all, whole foods are always going to be...
Dhruv, what does food processing actually mean?
Yeah, so this is a term which has been getting a lot of exposure in the press and in the media. People are getting concerned about processed foods and ultra-processed foods. Let's just go back. And I studied cultural anthropology, and one of my years was a focus on the anthropology of food. We as a species began evolving from primates to humans about 1 million years ago. And we began, one of the biggest advents of processing was the invention of being able to cook food with fire, when we discovered how to create fire. And it was arguably the most influential aspect of our metabolic and cognitive evolution. With fire, you were able to break down so many nutrients and proteins, which you just imagine, when you're eating meat raw, how much of that is really digestible, or trying to eat pulses or grains, which are uncooked. It's virtually, you'd barely even get any of the nutrition out of it. So when we invented fire, it was absolutely it's what actually accelerated our evolution, the size of our brains, because we were able to get so many more nutrients into our body, and you also had the ability to make your food safe. Because imagine meat, imagine so many other raw foods as well can have a lot of bacteria on them. Fire eliminated that completely. And cooking is one of the most intense processes that food can go through. It's something our grandmothers have been doing for thousands of years. So when we look at processing, we have to really look at, what are we talking about? Because fundamentally what really matters about what's in your food is what's in your food. And that's expressed with the ingredients label and the nutritional profiles. Our grandmothers have been cooking, boiling, baking, milling, pressing, fermenting, smoking, curing foods for thousands and thousands of years. And none of those processes are necessarily bad. When we look at the processing of foods, it's kind of something which I think is just an easy way for food marketing to confuse people. And there are only a few exceptions where processing of food is a problem. One, when you are taking good nutrients out and possibly putting bad nutrients back in. So for example, you're taking fiber out and you're replacing it with sugars and starches. And the second is when you talk about frying, which is a process our grandmothers have also been doing for thousands of years. But frying is an unhealthy process because it involves the hydrogenation of fats and very high temperatures. And that creates cholesterol bonds, that creates trans fats in foods. Naturally, plant-based foods have no cholesterol in them. None. It's only animal foods, dairy, milk, meat, that will actually, eggs and meat, which will actually have cholesterol. So that's an example of processing that is an issue. But when we look at so many foods, look at your most basic foods. Take bread. Bread could arguably be considered an ultra-processed food because it's also made from a processed ingredient, which is flour, right? You don't make bread directly from wheat. Bread goes through an immense amount of processing to end up on your plate in the way it is. That does not make it bad for you. Take pasta. We eat pasta globally, right? It's a food we never even think about being processed, but it is. It goes through a lot of processing to become the way it is. Doesn't mean it's bad for you. Let's even take something even as simple as mineral water, which in the Middle East and many other countries comes from desalination plants. That goes through immense processing to take seawater, extract all the salts and all the pollutants and all the bacteria that's in seawater to then create mineral water. Does not make it bad for you. And then take something like multivitamins, which we take for our own health, which we know are not bad for you, which we know they're good for you. Your doctor will tell you to take them. They go through immense processing. They would be ultra processed if you would want to even try and structure it out in terms of how much processing that would go through. So I think these labels of processed and ultra processed need to actually just be eschewed for a moment, and we need to start looking at the nutritional content of food and at the ingredient content, because that's where the truth really lies. That's what will tell you what's in your food. Just because something is processed does not make it bad. And I'll come back to that one caveat I was saying, other than the two processes we know, where you fry in oils, and the second one where you take good nutrients out. And I'll give an example of a processed food which we all may think is very healthy, but it's not. And that's juice. When you look at a juice, what we're doing is we're taking all the fiber out, and we're just leaving the sugars and the water. And yes, there's a small amount of minerals and vitamins in there, but you could get those minerals and vitamins from a vitamin supplement or many other foods. But what you're ending up with in the juice is a lot of sugar, and most of which, about 50% of which, will be fructose, which goes to your liver, and it becomes fat eventually in your liver. So that's an example of where processing is an issue. But that truth will come through on the ingredients label. When you look at the ingredients label of juice, it will say, 18 grams of sugar or 15 grams of sugar per 100. And it's not too different from soft drinks, which also have a high sugar content. Now, when you eat fruit, that's different, because fruit is, in its unprocessed form, has all the fiber. And that fiber will mitigate the blood sugar rise when you consume all that sugar, because some of your gut bacteria will come out and play in that fiber, and they'll actually help reduce the load of the sugar in the body. So it's not about whether the food is processed or not. It's about what's in it, and that's on the label, and that's on the ingredients label and nutritional profile.
Okay, so everyone's heard it here first, that they need to stop panicking if they read the word processed, or if they see in the media the word ultra processed, but instead they should be asking themselves, what ingredients are in this and what's on the nutrition panel? So how can we as consumers panic less and just isolate the information that's important for us to know? Will this do damage to my body, or will this actually help me and my health and my goals?
And I'm going to come in here about processing, because processing and the ultra processed label, and we can get into that a little bit later of how it came about. Processing is necessary, and it supports us, and we need to understand that processed food is convenient. So we have canned tomatoes, or a nice vegetarian meal that's you buy it ready. Or it also allows for accessibility for people. It allows for food security. It allows for food safety. So processing or processed food also allows us there's a lot of good to it, because we can transport it. We can take it to the middle of the desert. We can take it to anywhere under the sun, and it's safely moved, and it's readily available. So there is good to it as well. But unfortunately, the whole processed label is getting a very, very bad rap.
It does definitely get forgotten why we started processing food in the first place, because I think there's a social media narrative that perpetuates, everything in whole food form is better, or try and stick to things as close to as we were when we were cavemen, the paleo diet. And that just seems to make people feel more stressed about whether they're doing the right thing or the wrong thing. So if listeners want to know what's the healthier option to choose that's going to optimize their baseline intake of vitamins, nutrients, minerals, they're not going to disrupt their gut too much, what do they do when they try and decipher whether a food is good or bad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so first of all, whole foods are always going to be the place where you'll find the answers the most easily. Your whole foods, and I'm talking about plant-based foods here, whether it's a fruit or whether it's a grain or whether it's just something which is naturally grown from the coming out of the earth. Much easier to decipher that problem because there's very often not the complex ingredients label associated with it. So that's always an easy. So if you were to take a bowl of chickpeas, right? Not the canned ones, but let's say a bowl of chickpeas on its own. There's most often when you buy it, there's not even going to be an ingredients label, and that's something you can just find online. And okay, it's a whole food, it's a chickpea, it is what it is. Now, whether it's organic or not, whether fertilizers were used, that comes down to what your supply chain is like and whether your supermarket labels things properly and whether they have an organic section and organic produce. But so that would be the first place where okay, these are whole foods. They're coming to me naturally. And the reason I say plant-based is because when it comes to animal products, you can't say that anymore, unfortunately. There is no animal that's raised in a farm, in a clean environment. 99%, and not that there's no animal, of course, there are people who have their farms and they do that, but 99% of the commercial meat industry today is animals in concrete buildings, all living in cages, stacked up one against each other, with an immense amount of bacteria moving between them, which is why we give animals so many antibiotics. And then they're also given a lot of hormones, and the animals themselves have been genetically modified so much that I think that when you even look at a cut of meat today, even though it may not have gone through immense processing, the animal itself has been so heavily processed through genetic engineering for the past, let's say, 30 to 40 years, that you're getting something which is no longer very close to what the natural form was anyway. And chicken is just like the number one example of that. So coming back to, how do you decipher whether something is good for you or not? And if it's not a whole food, and let's say it is a processed food, let's say it's a bread, or let's say it's a plant-based milk, or a plant-based burger. That information will be on the back of the pack. There's legal requirements for all companies that they have to follow for ingredients declaration and for the nutrition. And you can start anywhere, but I think the easiest thing to look at is the nutritional profile first, because the big highlights that you're looking out for there are excess sugar, trans fats, cholesterol, and if it's high in sodium. Those are the four things you got to worry about. And saturated fats. Foods very high in saturated fats, over 20, 30%, are also not very good for you. So look out for those bad points first when you want to figure out, is this food bad for me? Look out for the saturated fats, look out for the cholesterol, trans fats, the sugars, and sodium. Now, of course, a small amount of sugar is all right, small amount of saturated fats, all right. Even a little bit of cholesterol arguably is all right. It's a long, deep discussion to go into because your body can regulate its own cholesterol levels. But trans fat's always going to be a problem. Your body cannot regulate trans fat, and that's what leads to a lot of coronary and heart diseases. So that will be on the label. Has to be there on the label. Those numbers will share it all. And some people, have a tough time reading labels and all, and that way there's our good friend Google's something of history now. Now it's ChatGPT. Will tell you that you can take photographs of a label, and there's various apps, of course, wonderful apps that also help consumers go through that information. But then some things that can be hidden in a nutritional label, which will then appear on the ingredients label. And those are certain ingredients which could be problematic to the human body, such as certain preservatives. Preservatives kill bacteria in food, but they also kill our gut bacteria, which is so vital for our whole digestive system, our metabolic systems, which then links into our immune systems. And then you can also have things like artificial sweeteners, which can be problematic, and we can talk about that separately. And then there are certain emulsifiers as well, which can cause havoc on the gut. An emulsifier is basically just help oil and water mix together. I mean, take soap. Soap, for example, is an emulsifier, right? It helps if you try to wash your hands with just water. As you've got grubby, dirty hands. That grub is not going to really come off very well. But the moment you put soap on, it mixes together, and all you see all that gray stuff come out, right? And so soap is an example of an emulsifier. It helps the oils from that grub and the water mix together so that they can all wash off. Um, Emulsifiers in food, there are different types, and they're not all bad for you, but there are certain ones which can have an impact on the gut, because your gut mucosa is also made up of a fat layer, and they can bind to that, and they can slowly start to wash away your gut lining. I went through a lot of gut issues as a child, as a teenager, post college, and then eventually had a surgery when I was 24. And then, yeah, I realized that it had a lot to do with just certain ingredients that were affecting my gut bacteria and gut health. So those are things which, again, you can see very easily on the label. And if you're not sure what something is, you just Google it and see what, and very quickly it'll also show you any associated health risks with those particular ingredients. But to summarize it, it's basically, emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial sweeteners, and of course, hydrogenated oils. But then that will show up on the nutritional label. That will show up as a trans fat and as cholesterol on the nutritional label. But the preservative sweeteners and emulsifiers won't. So those are things to look out for as well.
That's a really helpful framework to have a keen eye for looking out for those trans fats, and then definitely having some extra support, whether it's ChatGPT or Google, to maybe explain what some of the words that we don't understand are, because that's where these preservatives or emulsifiers might come in. But what you touched upon when you'd referenced that whole foods, we can largely deem them to be safe, to be good for us, but actually animal products nowadays are very much so questionable in terms of what we can consider is going to be healthy for us to put in our body, because it's not as it was beforehand, where it was more natural farming, agriculture. So with that being said, when it comes to plant-based products or plant-based proteins compared to animal-based protein, what are the differences there in terms of the value that they provide to our body and our health, or are they all the same?
Sure, yeah.
Could you believe, because I can't believe it, that only 7.5% of people that listen to the 1 in a Million podcast are subscribed? Do not be that person. If you value the information that I'm bringing you and you know that it's helping you to become a healthier, more knowledgeable, more confident person, then please hit subscribe, and it will teach me what content you love so I can keep bringing you more.
This is one that comes up a lot, right? People are always concerned that, you can't get enough protein from plants. Well, where do all the animals we eat get their protein from? All the land animals we eat are herbivores, in fact. So they all get their proteins from plants. And when we break down protein, it's broken up into 20 amino acids, 9 of which are essential. And all of those amino acids exist in plants because plants are the base of our entire food system on Earth. They take energy from the sun. They produce all the nutrients that the global ecosystem needs. Animals will eat those plants, other animals will eat those animals, and the food chain goes up that way. So we know that all amino acids are available in plants, and it's just that animals uptake them and they concentrate them. The disadvantage with plant-based foods is only that the concentration of the proteins is less. So you can tend to have plant foods which will have protein, but it'll be 5%, 8%, 12%. And then you'll have certain animal foods which are up to 18 to 24% if you take chicken breast, very, very high in protein. Now, all those amino acids that are in the meat are also in plants. But the other disadvantage with plants is that plants will have high amounts of certain amino acids and they may have low amounts of other ones. So take yellow peas, for example, which we use in Nadura products. Yellow peas are high in all of the 19 amino acids, but they're low in methionine. So what do we do about that? So, well, where's methionine high in plant foods? So methionine tends to be high in grains. So we use rice protein to boost up the methionine content. So the bottom line is, as long as you're just having a balanced diet and you're mixing up plant proteins from grains and legumes or pulses, so basically the beans rice combo, the beans and grain combo, which all over the world people have had. In South America, there's beans and rice. In India, there's lentils and rice. In the Far East, it's a concept. When as long as you're mixing the proteins from both sources of types of plants, of grains and pulses, you're going to get all the amino acids that you need. And digestibility comes up. And yes, this is another area where plant proteins may have a disadvantage because arguably their digestibility is about 5 to 8% less than the meat product. Okay, so that just means that you need to eat 5 to 8% more, which is really, we're talking about maybe 2 tablespoons. Because if you say that, oh, well, the digestibility is low and I have to mix the proteins from 2 sources, this makes it too complicated. I'm going to go for the animal protein. What you're forgetting is that with that animal protein, you're getting cholesterol, you're getting trans fats, you are getting residual amounts of hormones and antibiotics too. So for the sake of trying to just make it very convenient to get your protein, you're also putting other life-threatening nutrients into your body, which you're not doing with the plants. So I don't really think it needs to be that conscientious. As long as you're having a little bit of rice with your beans, I think you're getting all the amino acids that you need. And we see it, right? We see it in nature. We see some of the strongest animals in the world are herbivores. Horses, oxen, donkeys, look at the size of elephants, right? And it's all just from plants. We were in Kenya recently and we were just watching them eat, and they eat a lot. And they're not getting a very diversified source. It's not like they're going around saying, I'm going to have a bit of rice and I'm going to have a bit of grains, right? But yet their bodies are able to metabolize those amino acids so well and they're able to be so strong and large. So it's a complete and absolute myth. And recently studies have come out actually also showing this, and the media luckily has also been exposing it. So if you just Google, a plant protein versus animal protein benefits, and you'll see that article will come up.
And there are plant proteins that are available, and there are certain foods that are complete proteins that have all the 9 essential amino acids. So soybeans or the byproducts of soy, like tempeh, tofu, chia seeds, buckwheat, quinoa. These are just like some examples, not that you can eat that through the course of the day. But as Dhruv earlier mentioned, like intuitively, cuisines have done this whole food combining. So out here, you'd see a lot of hummus. So you've got like the chickpea and sesame seed, or falafel, similar thing. You've got like the sesame seeds come in and the chickpeas. So they combine and allow for the complete amino profile spectrum to be present. And you don't even need to be so methodical when it comes to eating. As long as you're eating a diverse range of food through the course of the day, you are combining, and it doesn't have to be in like the one plate. Even if it's spread across the day, you are getting all your amino acids and you are getting your sources of protein.
I'm just going to add one more thing. If you want to just do a deeper dive in on this, right? Which
Go
is where
ahead.
the rabbit hole gets kind of interesting. So we're all on this protein craze. Protein. And there have been a lot of studies also looking into why also the rates of heart disease are going up. So on one hand, that's got to do with the fact that people are eating so much animal protein that they're not realizing how much trans fat they're also getting into their body. But there was also some interesting research done on plant proteins, and particularly amino acids like methionine, because they tried to understand there was a higher longevity in herbivores than compared to carnivores. Now that had a lot of other factors associated in the study because carnivores have to hunt, they're running, they're exposing themselves to a lot more risk. But it prompted some research on what is it about plant proteins that actually helps this longevity gene. And it actually had to do with the fact that methionine, this amino acid that we're all concerned about not getting enough of, is actually also something that cancer feeds on. And so people who are going through or have gone through chemotherapy and are in remission are often given methionine blockers. So just like sugar, cancers feed on sugar, cancers also grow very rapidly on methionine. So we actually, and when we looked at this, it was after we had done our formulations, and we kind of just look at, let's just totally taper down the amount of rice protein in there, because the research is showing that unless you're a bodybuilder and you're looking to compete, and it really matters for you to have those extra 10, 20 grams of muscle. Um, that Why is it that we're all so obsessed with protein? So many studies are showing that we don't actually need as much protein as was earlier claimed, 2 grams per kilo of body weight and all that. All those numbers are being toned down dramatically. And the question of whether we really need high amounts of methionine are also coming up. So, you were mentioning soy being a great source of protein, which, it is, because it's also not very high in methionine. We see, yeah, there's been extensive studies on it. It's a very interesting book called Proteinaholic, which I read maybe a few months ago, and a lot of this research is presented there as well.
I love that name, Proteinaholic.
Mm.
I haven't heard of that one, but I'll have to read it. And this is fascinating because I didn't know that about methionine. So I think with the research that's coming out, there's just more and more and more for us to keep up with, but it's lending itself to show that it's not as black and white as everyone screams it is to be. But there will be some people listening that think, okay, well, what about the additives or the processing of plant-based meat alternatives, whether it's the sodium content, methyl cellulose? What is the benefits or the harm of those ingredients?
Yeah, plant-based meats are a category of foods that have been in the boxing ring by the global food industry. And I think it's because it also just poses such a big threat to the giant of the meat industry. The meat industry is a $1.3 trillion industry globally. And plant-based meats have been, yeah, accused of being processed and various other things, artificial and this and that. And sure, there are some brands that, maybe use artificial ingredients. So first of all, when you talk about making a plant-based meat, yes, it has to go through some processing. It doesn't grow from the ground naturally like that, like bread and pasta. But what are we fundamentally doing over here? Well, you're taking the raw food of yellow peas in this case. You are removing most of the excess carbohydrate, and you're retaining the protein. Because as we were talking about earlier, pulses like chickpeas and yellow peas, they'll be maybe 12 to 15% in protein, and the balance amount is carbohydrate, and there'll be some fiber, a little bit of fat as well. So the excess carbohydrates are removed, so you're left now with a very concentrated protein. Now this is very similar to meat in terms of its concentration, and it's got a little bit of the fat as well that comes in from the yellow peas. We then dry that out completely, and we then rehydrate it with our own seasoning. So arguably, it's no different from a process of, let's say, like milling and marination. That's what you're doing, and then you're just forming it into shapes and freezing the product. So we would probably be much less processed, and definitely much less processed than bread, much less processed than pasta, and at the same level of processing as, yeah, foods which go through a milling, a dehydration, and a marination. That's something that's been done for thousands of years. There's not a single study that has shown any negative impact of a plant-based meat product on the human body. And there have been extensive studies that show that plant-based meats are actually healthier than their animal counterpart. Now, we don't go around marketing plant-based proteins and plant-based foods as health foods, but we definitely do market them with a very strong confidence as healthier foods to the animal version, and that has been extensively proven. So that's something else as well. Your listeners can go and Google plant-based meats, health benefits versus animal meat. Because when you look at the animal version, you've got the cholesterol and the trans fats. You'll also have preservatives, which have to go into 99% of all meats will use preservatives. You have to, because there's dangerous bacteria in meat, and food companies can't have the risk of anyone getting sick. You don't need those in plant-based meats. Some companies do use them. We don't. We have a particular way of being able to formulate the product to keep it completely microbially safe. In fact, our shelf life studies show 2 years stability now,
Wow.
even though we only keep it for the shelf life for 1 year. Um, so in terms of that aspect of plant-based meats, I think it was just a very brilliantly articulated media and PR campaign by players in the meat industry that saw this threat. And I think they did a brilliant job of being able to win that out, because you go to anyone today and they'll say, oh, plant-based meats are processed. And they're having a sandwich with bread and sauces and a bunch of processed meats in the middle, and not even thinking of, hang on, what's the problem with processed? That dialogue hasn't happened, right? Then people will talk about the sodium. Oh, they're high in sodium. And I find that strikingly amusing too, because while people are saying, oh, plant-based meats are high in sodium, they're downing Humantra. Now, Humantra has, it's great brand, great product, but, and I'm not dissing it at all. I'm actually going to substantiate that these levels of sodium are not a problem. And in fact, they are good for your body. You need sodium. Sodium is an electrolyte. That's why Humantra is so popular. Now, Humantra has about 200 mg of sodium in a stick, which is 12 grams. So it's about 1.6% of the product. Yeah, about 1.6. We would have anywhere from 280 to 400 mg in 100 grams. So we're at about 0.3%. So when we talk about food nutrition and compare, we always just look at a percentage, right? Because you get confused with the serving size and, okay, I'm having this much, but you're having this much. So as a percentage, we're way lower than Humantra. And you could have, even in the highest sodium plant-based meat, take it up even, let's say, go up to 500 mg. The RDA for sodium is 2000 mg. So that means you could have 4 servings of it a day. Not that anyone's going to anyway. So again, it's something which no one is looking into the numbers. If you look at cheese, cheese has way more sodium. That's why cheese also doesn't need to be frozen, and you can just keep it in the fridge because of the high sodium content. Take a chicken sandwich. Your average chicken sandwich will have about 2 grams of salt, right? So correspondingly, you're looking at about over 1,000 mg of sodium there. Cold cuts, deli sandwiches, if you're having a ham sandwich or salami sandwich, probably 3 grams of salt over there. And what we're talking about when we talk about 400 mg or 500 mg, it's about 1 gram of salt. So it's a pinch of salt. So again, I think it's just a lot of negative PR about sodium. And let's remember, sodium is an essential electrolyte to the human body. If anyone gets sent to hospital, what's the first thing they put you on? It's a sodium drip, right?
It's true.
Because it's the one thing that they'll just want to make sure that, are your sodium levels okay? My grandfather once passed out and collapsed on the road because he was very low on sodium. So it's absolutely essential nutrient. And yes, too much of it is not good. Too much of anything is not good. So yeah, I think the sodium myth really needs to be addressed again, just by let's just look at numbers.
And you're also comparing to just meat, and no one's eating plain meat. From a culinary standpoint, you're going to season it, you're going to put some sauce on it, you're going to do something to it, you're going to process it in some way. And so you can't compare it. It's not the same comparison with like eating a plain piece of meat versus eating plant-based meat.
Definitely. It seems like the lack of knowledge is what feeds the fear, whereas understanding that sodium is absolutely a-okay if just not consumed in huge amounts. And what are those huge quantities, and what does that look like? So that's helpful for the listeners. And what about methyl cellulose?
Yes. Thanks. I forgot to bring that one up. Methyl cellulose. Now, methyl cellulose is used as a binder in plant-based meats, and it's used in other foods as well. We'll keep it to plant-based meats. It is made from the fibers coming from apples, pears, bamboo stalks. So it is an insoluble fiber, and which means it is actually a prebiotic gut fiber. It's called methyl cellulose because it has to go through processing, to have its color and its sort of bitter taste removed, because you can imagine the fibers of an apple. You're talking about the core and the stems, right? All those extra fibers, parts from the skin as well. They have a bitter taste. So that's why it's called methyl cellulose. But fundamentally, it's a fiber. And do you know where else it's also sold? It's sold in health stores and pharmacies for people with constipation or gut issues to help them re- flourish their gut bacteria, or to help them with constipation issues. You can Google the brand Citrucel, Citrucel, and they'll sell pure methyl cellulose capsules in the pharmacies, and there's various other brands that'll also do it. So it's a completely healthy ingredient. There's nothing wrong with it. But I think with anything, if you were to eat too much of it, like with anything, it would probably not be good for you. And excess amounts. There was a study that, of course, I think was funded with a very particular angle on mice, where they gave them something like equivalent of, if you were to eat the same amount of plant-based meat, it would be close to eating about 4 kilos of plant-based meat, so 40 burgers in a day. And then they found, yeah, it was disrupting their gut. Well, hell yeah, of course it's going to disrupt their gut. And I feel so bad for those mice that they were subjected to that. Because who's going to eat 40 burgers in a day? I mean, I think if you studied anything, if you ate 40 apples in a day, you're going to have a problem. So, which we would anyway because of sugar. Um, it's something that was just very brilliantly targeted and companies can remove it. They can use other fibers, but they don't, because we know that it's actually something which is not bad for you. And it's commonly used in other places. And we now see, as soon as we talk to our customers about it, and many of our customers are chefs and food service professionals, they totally get it. They're like, yeah, absolutely, we see what it is.
So what purpose does it serve? Why is it required within the product?
So it basically it helps create binding properties. So with plant proteins, we talked about how we're dehydrating our proteins from peas and rice and mixing them with our seasoning. Um, you're then left with a loose structure. So in order to give it that shape and that structure, methyl cellulose is used to bind it all together. We do have two products which don't use methyl cellulose, because we wanted to create something which was also which had a loose texture. There were chefs that were interested in something like that. So our mince products, for example, don't use methyl cellulose, which means that once you break it up, you'll see it's loose. It doesn't have that kind of stickiness. Um, and these kind of binders are also used in the meat industry. There's no difference. People are concerned about these kinds of ingredients in plant-based meats. They're also in meats. Meats will use different types of gums and binders. But yeah, it's widespread in
And
terms of the
it's
food industry.
prolific all over the food industry. It's prolific in all sorts of food products like ice cream or plant-based milks or anywhere under the sun. Baked goods. It's everywhere, because we are trying to combine in a kitchen, say. If you're trying to make a mayonnaise, you're taking oil and an acid, lemon juice or vinegar, and you need to combine it. So how do we bring those two structures together, which would commonly repel? You bring in egg yolk or a vinaigrette, so that you would bring in something like a mustard or a honey to bring the liquid aspect with a oil and a liquid together, like two things that should repel. So yeah, we need to bind things together. So even if you want to produce a really good ice cream or really good baked good, you will be using something to bring it together. And that's the purpose of it. That's the functionality of it.
That makes perfect sense. And I'm sure that if everyone started looking very closely on the back of all of the ingredient panels of all the foods they're consuming, they'd find these binders and gums far more common than they would expect.
Yeah.
Now, one question that I hear often from clients that we work with who want to use good quality nutrition to become the healthiest, happiest version of themselves, they tend to say, I will prefer to eat tofu or tempeh or seitan over a meat alternative, because they believe that it's a better and healthier product. And I assume when they say that, that's as a result of they believe that those products are less processed. But what is the processing of those products, and then how does it compare to a meat alternative?
So with tofu, it's relatively straightforward. It's soybeans, which are cooked, and then you extract like milk, remove the fiber of it. So the fiber is getting taken out, and then it's coagulated, kind of like how you do cheese. Get different textures, and it's good. It's a complete protein, but people don't like the taste. And food is such a primal thing. Like, we are evolved to want like really delicious food, and I I love tofu, but it doesn't always cut it the same way, especially as someone who used to eat meat. Um, and then even with tempeh, great food. It is what would be classified as a whole food. Cooked soybeans, you introduce like a fungal a fungal into it, and it's a mushroom that kind of grows over it. So it's a mycelium structure. Again, great, but if it works for people, good. But it doesn't always work for people because they're craving something. And usually when people switch to plant-based foods, they're coming to it for a reason. And more often than not, it is an ethical reason. Because the health, yeah, you can justify it, you can be plant-based for some time, but it's very often for the ethical reason that people come to it.
For sure. And then it's also, not to mention, pretty helpful if you're striving to consume some more protein to then be able to consume what is a bit more of an isolated form of protein in the meat alternative. So it's, from a fitness standpoint, also something that's really helpful. And just as we touched on earlier, the sweeteners, we've said preservatives, binders, gums. What about the sweeteners that are in the foods nowadays? Is there harm to them, or is it actually quite beneficial?
So this is an area which has got 3 decades of research behind it. And each decade of research has to focus on a different sweetener, realize it's bad for you, and then the food industry comes up with a new one. And then they have to do the research on that, do the long-term studies, and then go, oh, this is also bad for you. And then the food industry comes up with the next one. For example, we started off with aspartame and neotame in the 60s, and then we moved to sugar alcohols in the 80s, and then we moved to stevia in the late 90s. Now, the question comes down to compared to what? So if we're comparing the sweetener to the sugar, and if we're talking about someone who's having 1 can of Coke a day, I have heard very convincing arguments from medical professionals that the sweetener is probably better for you, because diabetes is inevitable with having that level of sugar every day. Or for most people, it would be problematic and inevitable unless they're very active and they're able to burn off all that sugar. But that doesn't mean that the artificial sweeteners are good for you either. And there's been extensive research done on aspartame and neotame, because these, they're called phenylneutronics, work on the brain directly. And that is where most of the studies have indicated risk in terms of cognitive health. The next generation of sweeteners, polyols, so sugar alcohols, maltitols, and lactitol, sorbitol, they proved to have a lot of gut issues, which also some reviews on Amazon will also show. I don't know if I shouldn't mention it here, but you can
I've
check
seen
out the
plenty of
reviews.
those reviews.
Okay, I think everyone has, right? So we come up with better sweeteners, and now we've got things like stevia. But the bottom line is that these sweeteners are still confusing the mind-gut connection. You're telling your brain that there's something sweet going in, and your brain enjoys the food because it's sweet. But your brain is also then inducing an insulin response off of something which is not sugar. So now you've got an insulin spike anyway, and you've got no sugar in the body. So all that insulin is floating around, and the impact of that is something that your endocrinologists have been writing a lot about. That what is this doing? That when you have insulin, but you don't have the sugar in the body, so and that can lead to insulin sensitivity. And I personally have been having a protein powder which has had a small amount of stevia, and I've been kind of now wanting to move off of that because it's you don't realize it, but because it's the stuff that you're eating every day that's going to affect you the most. So definitely, I'm of the opinion that you're probably better off with a small amount of sugar, 5 grams compared to the stevia per day. And I'm someone who's active; I can burn it off. But there are other studies that don't show any health impact on stevia and those kind of sweeteners. But fundamentally, if we just think about what it's doing, it's a bit of a confusing process for the body to absorb, because you're replacing, in some cases, 10, 20, 30 grams of sugar with 0.03 grams of stevia. And then you have to fill the rest of the product with something else. So they, I think they do come into a questionable gray area, even the new age sweeteners. Now, there are ingredients like allulose, which has some fantastic research behind it. I've been trying it on my own body. I haven't found any fantastic research coming out of my own body or any great findings. But allulose is, and the new age sweeteners, which are also prebiotic fibers, show a lot of promise, because there your fructose molecule and your glucose molecule are bound together and they don't break up in the body. So your body processes it as a fiber, and it has a sweet taste. And in terms of volume, it's about the same amount of volume. In fact, you'd have to use a little bit more allulose than sugar. But with stevia, it's like a tiny amount of this very high intensity ingredient that you're using.
And there's studies where you compare someone drinking a can of cola versus a diet cola. And if you consume the diet cola, because of that gut-brain connection, the participants ate more because their body was seeking that just to regulate the insulin. So again, it boils down to, how does your body feel? What is your life? And make those choices accordingly.
Absolutely. I noticed that whether it is eating just foods that are higher in sugar or having more artificial sweeteners, that cycle of the cravings always seems to get kicked up. Whereas if you just eat nutrient dense foods that have a nice seasoning, flavor profile, it tends to stay relatively consistent. This has been so eye-opening. There have been so many discoveries that I have made, especially about the methionine. I didn't know that. So thank you so much, Neha, Dhruv. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We'll leave all of your information in the description box, including where people can go and try Nadura products. So thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
It's been a pleasure.
And I'm going to say one last thing, which is when we look at a food system and food processing, everything should be able to nourish the body and the planet. And we should never have to make this choice of either or, and everything should be both and. So our food choices, what's out there, there's companies out there putting better products. And we just need consumers to start looking at things better with, a different lens, rather than making everything very binary. This is good, this is bad. So yeah, a more holistic view.
Yeah.
That's a perfect takeaway. Thank you.
I know you wanted to also ask this question. I'll just touch on it for 20 seconds. But all companies that are trying to create sustainable foods for the environment, these are people who are trying to do good, and their products will also not be bad for you. There's not a single company I know of which is on this agenda of creating plant-based innovation and are going through the challenges of it that are have some hidden agenda. There's always a good motivation behind most of the food innovation that you're seeing, which tries to be sustainable, and most often it is also much, much healthier.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you think that episode was valuable, then you definitely need to go and listen to episode 27, Cortisol, the hidden fat loss killer, why women struggle and how to fix it. It is going to blow your mind and make everything moving forwards so much easier for you. Definitely go and give it a listen.